Welcome to this week's episode of Risa's newsletter. Today we speak to serial entrepreneur and scaler in Japan that I think everyone should meet at least once. Barry O'Neill has founded and exited multiple companies over the last 20 plus years. His ventures include bringing Japanese mobile games overseas and also publishing digital children's content such as The Hungry Caterpillar. So quite an eclectic background. He currently dedicates himself to investing in Japan through Value Create, while also serving as an entrepreneur in residence at Techstars Tokyo Accelerator. In this episode, we dive into Barry's theories on consumer demands and how to spot them, as well as unraveling the tremendous bullishness the world has towards Japanese startups. I think Barry shared with us a perspective that only he can share with his unique experience as a serial entrepreneur in a wide range of industries, as well as seeing Japan 20 years ago. So I hope this provides a little more substance to the clout that Japan has been getting these days. Thank you so much again for being here and enjoy. Barry, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor. I've been following you on LinkedIn and Substack for quite some time. So I can't believe I'm here.
Thank you so much. All right, we can jump right in then. You've had quite an eclectic run in entrepreneurship, from publishing Japanese mobile games through Upstart before the iPhone was even invented, to digital children's publishing and story toys, to now investing in the food tech space. It's a very wide range of industries, yet you've been incredibly successful in building them. So I think everyone's curious, what's the secret? What are the conditions startups need to show prospects of success?
Well, so there's a lot of questions in there, and definitely I would describe my career path as eclectic. Um, I've often described myself as a reluctant entrepreneur. It's never a path I decided to choose for myself. The only path I chose for myself was curiosity and following my waku waku. Always just follow my excitement, and that's been the defining piece of it. I mean, I quit high school when I was 17. I think they call it quiet quitting now. Basically, I just stopped working.
Mm,
I wasn't very good at textbook learning. Was good with computers. I had my first computer when I was 12 years old, I think back in 1984. And I then ended up actually working. Apple had a retail group at the time. Their European headquarters were in my hometown. So I ended up working part-time with them.
mm.
Um, and I just left school and I jumped right into, the other thing I loved was punk music. So I tried to always get both in the same in my career. But I quit school and I went full time. I was working in pre-sales tech, and then I sold a lab into Ireland's National College of Art and Design, and then they asked me to come and teach applied computing to artists. This is back in 1995 or 1994. I found myself as a lecturer in the National College of Art and Design,
Wow.
and then that got me into arts, and arts has consistently been a passion, and creativity, curiosity, invention, always been a passion. That got me into arts, which weirdly got me into telecoms, which saw me do my first internet startup, which
Mhm,
was Rondo Mondo, which was part of the Irish telecoms company, which when that failed was a huge blow to me personally, huge blow to my confidence. I felt that I'd failed as a human being.
mm, mm,
And it took a while to get myself back together after that. I went into mobile games at that point, and then digital publishing, a stint in venture in between, a stint in Bandai Namco, heading up their European business. So kind of like all these things I sort of take for granted, but when you ask me to try to unpick that journey, it's really, really hard. I think, wait a second, did I have any strategy at any point over
mhm,
this time? And actually, I think I did, and that I've always wanted to learn, and that has been a great driver. And I've always looked at problems. Most of my career have been involved in consumer. Like any of my startups have been consumer focused.
mm,
I, I have always wanted, when I see something that I feel is broken, I like to try to fix it. I mean, just
mm,
whether it's something small in my house, whether it's something like using digital technology for preschool education and try to
mm,
fix things like that. So, definitely following curiosity and excitement, follow my waku waku. Things lead from one thing to another. So I don't
mhm,
think there's really any secret to it other than mindset, curiosity, an appetite for risk, and a positive outlook about setbacks and failure, but that often takes a crisis to arrive at.
Mm,
My my favorite quote about entrepreneurship is not about entrepreneurship at all. It's
mm,
from Douglas Adams' Life, the Universe, and Everything, which I think was the fourth book in his Hitchhiker's Guide trilogy. Um,
mm.
and the quote is, "There's an art to flying, or rather a knack. And the knack lies in how to throw yourself at the ground and miss." And that for me is one of the best quotes about entrepreneurship,
Mm.
or my path at entrepreneurship, I think, which has been, they said, more Forrest Gump than strategically oriented.
I see. So, would you say that when you see a problem and you said that you want to fix it when you see those problems, do you think it's like the process of fixing that causes the waku waku or the prospect of it being fixed that gives you waku waku or?
I think it's the prospect of it being fixed and the path to what one learns over that.
Mm,
I would obsess with trying to fix issues or trying to achieve perfection in some places. I think most entrepreneurs will tell you this.
mm, mm,
And and I also, that other great quote about the definition of madness being doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. I see that happen all the time. I say, well, actually, let's try new things.
mhm,
Um, so I think, you know, that path, the journey is what is very gratifying for me.
mm,
There are different ways that it's expressed, or has been expressed over the years, and there's any given point across my three, what I call my internal telecom startup. There are any given points you could ask me, like, are you enjoying yourself? And I would have said, no, take me out of here. Like, bring
mm,
me a job in the bank or something. But certainly when in hindsight, the journey is always gratifying, and what one learns is hugely gratifying too.
mm,
I think a lot of the successes, interestingly, come from serendipity, happy accidents, unintended pivots. Um, I think what you learn as an entrepreneur is the pattern recognition to see, when you can turn a happy accident into a plan. I know there's startup CEOs. I get the plans from startup CEOs all the time that map out the route to success. All plans are perfect. All plans
mm,
look amazing. The forecast looks fantastic. Ask them in a month what it's like, ask them in 6 months what it's like. It changes all the time. So
mm,
certainly I see startups that map out the route to success. And I also see it with Japanese startups a lot. They have this, I'd never heard of it actually, but like a kind of a 5-year capital plan, saying this is our path to IPO, like very specific. In 18 months' time, we'll raise our Series A, then we'll do our Series B, and then we'll do our IPO. And I'm like, how do you know this? Like, none of this is going to happen. People say, well, did VC ask for the capital plan? I said, look, we kind of need to go with the flow here and just figure out that, you know, turn the happy accidents into a plan
mm,
and pivot as you need to pivot. Because a lot of people don't realize just how much depends on luck and how much depends on a happy accident or a serendipitous meeting or that in startup success. Certainly in my experience.
definitely. What do you think those Japanese startups are driven by to have this urge to have this, this very precise plan for their startup?
Well, I mean, I think uh, the concept when I was in Japanese corporate life, the concept of the midterm plan and the
Mm,
concept of planning in general, I think is quite it's a specifically Japanese type of planning that looks to eliminate or at least identify all possible risks and all possible outcomes.
mm,
And and I think it's almost innate, at this point. I
mm,
think there's less of a reliance on randomness, or just kind of going with the flow. So I personally think it's a cultural thing, but I can't say why, but I do see it in all aspects of life, in
mm,
Japan. Now I do think, and I want to talk about this a little bit at the end. I do think it's changed a little bit. I think of all of the generations with the highest potential for entrepreneurship, Japan's Gen Z is
mm,
that generation. I
mm,
do see a much more global viewpoint, a much more global approach to problem solving, and I
mm,
think I I often speculate, is it because everybody they grew up in the same social media as everybody else around the
Mm,
world, or we
mm,
all were watching the same TikToks at the same time? So, it's I'm curious about that, and I actually like to get your view on that.
mm, mm,
But so I think that the days of having to the fully prescribed plan from, like from seed capital to IP probably over to an extent, or not as important anymore. But like it's always fascinated me that people can plan like this. And
mm,
and
mm.
and when I was in Bandai Namco, the midterm plan, oh my goodness, that was just bane of my existence.
It's definitely very, very different to a startup or anything, I'm sure. It's a huge company.
Mm.
Thank you so much. We can move on to the next question for now and get back to that topic a bit later. With Upstart, you entered the market when Japan already had the technology and the US had the growing demand for flip phone mobile games. And then with Story Toys, you built and scaled the company just as children's use of the iPad for education was becoming more normalized. How do you spot growing consumer demands, and how do you judge that they are trends that will stay?
I think you need to be able to take a completely objective viewpoint, and you have to dissociate yourself from the product that you plan on building and see it entirely through the eyes of the consumer. Um, um, you know, I think you're probably familiar with some of the work. Like, he's being an obnoxious podcaster, but he writes beautifully. Scott Galloway.
Mm,
Scott Galloway wrote a great article called "Time Machines and Species Failure." And
mhm,
but forgetting about the species failure part of that, and go and read that. The time machine side of that was very, very interesting. Scott Galloway basically said, successful consumer startups extend time or enhance time. Um, and it's kind of true. You just kind of think about it. Well, the examples that he used are things like originally Ford or Boeing, um, Apple, even luxury goods, like creating a better consumer experience.
mm,
Netflix, to avoid ads, although we think a lot of time trying to figure out what to watch next. So I think that's a really, really important point, is that if you're looking at a nascent trend, or even if you
mm,
don't know about the trend. And actually, when myself and my co-founders started Upstart, people in the West, they were still playing Snake on their Nokias.
mm,
We didn't have the flip phones. We knew they were coming. We didn't actually have the flip phones that were capable of playing sophisticated games. Um, and I remember I effectively lost my job. My first startup had my .com was gone. And I remember I had launched some of the first mobile content services, like the old, like even before it was kind of parallel to IMO. They were called wireless application protocol. It was just
mhm.
text-based services on your phone. I'd launched
Yeah.
some of the first consumer content in Western Europe. And I was a huge gamer, always was, still am when I have the time. And I remember hearing that people were playing fairly sophisticated games on their phones in Japan. So I got in touch with the only Japanese person that I knew.
Mhm.
Um, and I flew to Japan, and I got on the subway, and people were just on their phones, just reading. Now, this might sound crazy, but like, I remember a time when people didn't have computers on their desks, and
Mm,
certainly people in the West didn't have phones in their pockets all the time. Um, and I was just so, okay, so this is a time enhancement. Like, this subway time, these hour-long commutes, people are able to use these, and people were playing games. And I said, okay,
oh,
this is something that's really, really going to take off when the technology in the West increases, when the wireless technology increases, or when we start to see these more sophisticated phones. Um, when we start to see phones with data, not phones with 3G, 4G, 5G, but
mm,
phones with data in the West, people will start playing these games. And lo and behold, it happened. And Upstart would have been one of the first. I think we probably got into it a little bit early.
mm,
We were one of the first of the things, and we definitely got out of it a little bit late. So that was, and I spent a, I guess that was a, did I spot a trend? I mean, I just saw something that seemed to make a lot of sense, was give
mm,
people something to do with their spare time when they've got this device in their pocket. So give people something to do on it. And I'm kind of sorry for my contribution to the demise of society when I look around myself and see up there on their phones all the time, including myself. But at the time I remember looking at another trend, which was interactive television. So this is another
Mm,
big buzzword. We're talking about 2002 here.
mm,
And I remember thinking, do I want to do mobile games or do I want to do interactive TV? And I remember also looking in the Japanese market. I just thought, no, everybody's going to have a phone. There
mm,
will be no landlines at some point in the future. People would never believe me when I said it, but everybody's going to have a phone and they're going to need something to do with it. And entertainment is great. And 12 months later, we're probably one of the most successful mobile games companies globally. So it's
mm,
kind of accidental startup in some ways. So
mm.
yeah,
Definitely. With the interactive TV, what were
yeah.
kind of like key observations you made that made you not pursue that path?
It was not the was a television was a lean back device. Sit back
Mm,
and watch.
mm.
Um, Interactive devices like game consoles were lean forward devices, right?
Oh.
So, and a television was the center of a community, even if it was a community of just three people or five people in a sitting room. Um, and people were gonna fight over the remote control. And also, there wasn't really any compelling content other than games, which we had games consoles for
Mm,
already. So the idea that people would, and also we didn't have the ubiquity, and we certainly didn't have iPads, we didn't have multimedia phones, but we didn't even have the ubiquity of laptops at the time, or I don't think even we had Wikipedia at the time. So we thought
mm,
that this would be used for the kind of things we use Google for now, and like simple short form interactive games, quizzes, that sort of thing. But actually,
mm.
we're using our phones for all of that and our PCs, and it wasn't the correct use of technology in a social space. Was kind of a one-on-one interaction.
I see. And sorry, maybe it's my lack of knowledge, but a interactive TV is different to having a game console on a TV.
Yeah, I mean, this is how bad this technology was.
Uh-huh.
This like well, a console can be a multi consoles are very, very deliberately in forward experience, right? TV
Hmm.
is a passive experience. Sometimes you just want to be entertained, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Whereas, games are very much about you can have it as a social experience and four controllers or some people on their phones are all connecting to the same thing. Um, this was this was not a games industry type of experience. This was more like delivering multimedia content via the TV as opposed to an interactive game. So um, hard to describe it. I mean, it's more like CD-ROMs and stuff. I'm thinking back to the 1980s here. I'm really
Mm-hmm.
old. So this is what I thought we might be able to do. But
Mm-hmm.
but no, it was very, very clear, particularly after that first trip to Japan in 2002 or 2003. That first trip to Japan was very clear that actually mobile technology was the future. And I would say to people from 2002 onwards is that if you want to predict the future Western consumer behavior, look at Japan. Um, uh, Look at phones, look at how people are paying for things. Look at just the different adoption of tech for, but that kind of went off the rails at some point along the way.
Mm-mm. Yeah, for sure. I think I've
But
heard that from
yeah,
other .com entrepreneurs like during that time. Uh,
pretty specific theories about that too, but I won't get into them just yet. Like just staying on your trend of upstart and story toys. I think for an entrepreneur, it's one thing. There's like my when I did my internet business, my Rondo Mondo, my internet content business, that was
mm,
way too early, right? I was trying to build YouTube, Google Maps, um, everything like a full online platform like Google or Yahoo at the time, all simultaneously in 20, sorry, in 1998.
mm,
Um, when we just had like internet penetration was slow and low. So that was way too early. I think mobile games is a little bit too early too.
mm,
So it's a really important to get in kind of maybe a little bit on the early side. You certainly don't want to be a follower. You don't want to get into a red ocean. We got into a blue ocean, not a blue void, as I would
mm,
describe the early internet days. Knowing when to get out is also a really, really important point. And I think
mm,
we exited Upstart at the wrong time. as well.
Mm,
Um, you know, it was 2005, and we had at any given time, we were probably engaged in 4 or 5 discussions that could lead to acquisition, right? Because
mm,
mobile games was so hot. We kept saying no, we kept saying no, we kept saying no. And I remember there was one along the way, and an acquirer basically, we really wanted to be bought by them. They changed the terms because of some internal issue. They said, look, can we not buy you now? Can we invest now? And can we have a call option to basically buy the rest of your company in 6 months' time? Right.
mm,
And we're thinking, nah, no way, no way, you're not going to do it. And I remember their lawyer stepped outside at some point with me. I think I was going out for a break, and he said, take the deal. You got to take the deal. This is a guy with an Irish background. You got to take the deal. Take this deal.
mhm,
And I said, no, we're not interested. And he just rolled his eyes. And myself and John, one of my co-founders, John and Hiroshi, are the two co-founders. I remember we were outside afterwards. This is in New York. We had an office in New York, and we were like, "Yeah, we showed them." And 6 weeks later, they were acquired by a huge company. And had we taken the deal as had we had been advised, we would have like made a ton of money. And instead, we actually ended up selling for a much lower amount and the time that we needed to sell the business, not that we wanted to sell the business. And I would say it was a decent exit at the time, but we exited that little bit too late because our hubris and sense of success really got the better of us at the time. We
mm,
didn't have that much of a differentiation, and weren't able to to deliver quite the exit we'd hoped for.
I see. This is actually a great transition into my next question that I had for you, actually, which is you've exited two of your companies, Upstart and then Story Toys, in 2017 in a $10 million merger with New York-based Amplify Games and then London-based Touch Press. How do you make that decision that exiting is then a better option than continuing to run it as your own?
Well, that's actually there's a there's a little bit of nuance in that, um, that needs to be gone through. So that effectively that was part of a fundraising that I did for Story Toys. And I spent a long time. I'd spent, I think, probably 2 years trying to raise $2 million,
Mm,
because the kids application space, we weren't a games company, so we couldn't deliver the kind of high ARPU, free to play gaming type revenues that you get from companies that were like Zynga. But we weren't um, an, a school centric ed tech platform.
mm,
Um, that we were working on a B2B basis and could land a contract that was worth $5 million with New York State or something like that. We weren't either. We kind of fell, so we couldn't talk to the ed tech. The ed tech guys thought we were games companies, and the games guys thought we were ed tech companies. And I spent
oh,
2 years banging my head against the wall trying to raise money. And in the end, I had moved to San Francisco, and I was in an accelerator program called Colab, which was ironically out of Zynga, the games company. And I got introduced to Larry Berger, who was this founder and CEO of Amplify. And he said, "Hey, I've got this games company. I don't know what to do with it. And also, I've got this investor, Emerson Collective. So maybe we can all do something together." And so Emerson ended up leading or co-leading, I think it was, leading our Series A.
mm,
And we also brought in the Amplify games, and at the same time acquired Touch Press in the UK. So it was kind of a re-engineering of several companies. And I say to people, look, I spent 2 years trying to raise $2 million and then raised $10 million in about 2 months. So, this is about how it was configured. And a lot of that was serendipitous as well, meeting these people.
mm,
So, so the actual exit for Story Toys wasn't until 2021. Um, and Story Toys was like an incredibly tough journey at times. And even though I raised that round and did that touch press deal and amplified deal, by 2019, I was completely burnt out. I mean, the
mm,
company had nearly failed. I can't count the number of times the company nearly failed, even after doing that Series A. Um, but the company had started to do well on a quite a consistent basis.
mm,
And then COVID happened. And of course, because it was an educational learning platform for self-directed learning for consumers, the numbers like 10x over the course of a few weeks. And by this stage, Yeah, it was really really incredible. By this stage, I was exec chairman. My brother Emmett was the CEO and is still the CEO post acquisition. We had several approaches about acquisitions, and I had reached out to a friend of mine, Debbie Bestwick, who was running Team 17, to get her advice about how to engineer an acquisition or potentially a share buyback for the
Mm,
company. She
hmm
said, "Look, we'd love to take a look at it," and we ended up selling to them, and that was the right time because you know people were working from home, kids were. It wasn't necessarily perceived as a good thing to put a child in front of Minecraft all days long
mm,
or Peppa Pig on YouTube. Um, we had been building and still are building these beautiful products that were fully supportive of social and emotional and also early learning
mm,
using using licensed IP like Disney, Lego, my own. Probably the licensing deal I'm most proud of was probably the Eric Carle portfolio. So the exclusive
mm,
licenses to Harapako Wamushi, and so
hmm
My Very Hungry Caterpillar,
Yeah.
and all of that content, and built an amazing learning library around this.
Mm,
And it was just a natural time to it was a natural time to exit. 10 years. I mean, 10 years is a long time.
mm,
In a in a startup, it was never, in my view, going to get to the stage that it could ever support its own IPO because of consumer content. And I think you hear a lot from entrepreneurs. You kind of, whether you're doing it explicitly or through a specific exercise, whether you're thinking like how much more effort will it take to realize, an exit, like an
mm,
IPO type exit, or get it to unicorn status, which it was never going to get to unicorn status,
mm,
versus, exiting now and being comfortable with an exit now. That's
hmm
the kind of thought process you go through subconsciously. In our case, we also had investors who had been very patient over some very difficult times in the
mm.
business. And they needed an exit too. So it was the right thing to do at the right time, and absolutely some regrets as it goes on and surpasses I think 250 million installs now at this point. But the best it was the right thing to do at the right time.
Yeah, no, that's actually like an incredible story where multiple times prior to COVID, you almost failed a number of times, and then just because of COVID and the circumstances, it just
Well,
10x.
I would say it was because of the products and the traction of the products had gotten, and Emmett, my brother, had been the chief product officer and was
Mm,
absolutely ready to take on a significant commercial role. I was exhausted, and this was
mm,
in August 2019. So we said, look, let's reshuffle things. I'll stay on as executive chairman.
mm,
And so I'm still working there. You take the CEO role. He's done a great job in building that business. And then actually leveraging the COVID spike, but never saw the COVID fall off again. So really cemented the brand with consumers over that COVID period. So, but
mm,
yeah, it certainly COVID accounted for the remarkably good valuation that the company got
mm,
for what it was at the time, and it's
mm.
it's gone on to do great things since. So one of the very few occasions where you really see an acquisition adding value to the parent company.
Definitely, for sure. Thank you for sharing the story of Story Toys. My next question is, you've been involved in the Japanese innovation space since 2003, so you've seen Japan before all the inbound interest that we see today. How has Japan changed, and is it really as revolutionarily different as many people seem to believe it to be?
Um, I think you've written really well about this in the past. I think a lot of the inbound that we see is rose tinted glasses, I think was the phrase that you've used. I think
Yes.
a lot of the inbound is driven also by the remarkable um, reversal of the currency trend, in Japan.
Mm,
Japan, for a lot of visitors now, seems to be a very cheap place. And I think anything, when you're looking at economic factors like that, is always temporal and temporary. But let's talk about the innovation side. When I first landed in Japan in 2003, it was like landing on Mars. And it's still people. I always ask them, people, occasionally I meet somebody and it's their first trip to Japan. I say, what's it like? They say, well, it's like landing on another planet. And that's what it feels like. The color palette is different. The the audio soundtrack is different. The everything feels different about Japan.
Mhm.
Now, Japan, when I started going in 2003, it was ultra futuristic. So seeing everybody on their phones, and even the early payment platforms that were being used, and the kind of mobile commerce, the early efforts in mobile commerce, and of course, iMode had been going since I think 1998 at this point. So that's when I would say to people, as I mentioned earlier, you know, if you want to see what's happening worldwide in 2 years, go to Japan now.
Mm.
Mobile content, social media, mobile commerce, all of that. But Japan was at the time a self-described Galapagos,
Mm.
and I'm sure you've heard many other people refer to Japan as this. So the technology standards that were being used were developed, initially developed computing platforms to support a double-byte character set.
Mm.
And a lot of the differences in Japanese IT go back to this,
Mm.
because ASCII couldn't support kanji, or hiragana, or katakana for that matter. And even still, we come up against it, filling in a form online, and you got to switch to double byte. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So, but it was a Galapagos, and I actually think that when 3G systems were introduced, I'm curious as to what other tech entrepreneurs would think about this. When 3G systems were introduced into Japan, and particularly around the time that Vodafone bought JPhone, before SoftBank came in and bought the resulting entity. I actually think that Japan took a huge step backwards, in adopting overseas technology,
Mm.
um, and because suddenly the technology that they were being asked to comply with was substandard. Um, you know, they it wasn't what we were used to in terms of different devices. The variety of different devices and form factors and that in Japan before 3G was quite incredible. The next thing we see these global devices that don't work the way that they're supposed to, and a lot of confusion within the market. But it took, I mean, I think Japan was probably at sea from a technological, a mobile, certainly a consumer mobile perspective until the iPhone arrived.
Mm.
And then suddenly there was a device that actually could deliver the same level of interaction as some of the older devices. And then I think was the iPhone 6 when Apple finally introduced emoji. It took them a while. Then it took off. And so what we had was a standardization, of Japanese technology alongside, I think, international standards for development and UX and UI standards. Um, so it was, and I miss it. I miss that, like how weirdly different Japan was and how the
Mm.
old phones were. But that standardization has created an opportunity for Japanese entrepreneurs now to go global on that IT set. So I would say that Japan lost its sense of being like so far ahead of the market with consumer technology, but in doing so, created an entrepreneur. Now, often I now say to people, if you want to see what people are going to be doing on their phones in the next 2 years, go to China. Um,
Mm.
and weirdly, China is now the Galapagos, with their homegrown technology that cannot be used. That's like either export restricted, or import prohibited, whatever we want to call it, in the US. There's some amazing things happening there, but it is also its own Galapagos.
Mm.
However, TikTok, and all sorts of other platforms that we're seeing, China's overtaking of the US and overseas markets with electric car innovation, with battery innovation, getting to market sooner, or claiming certainly to be far ahead on their efforts to decarbonize, their economy. So it's been quite an interesting turnaround to see. But I also would think that Chinese companies just don't have the opportunity the Japanese companies do to act on the world stage because of that great reset or great realignment of Japanese IT with overseas standards, which is now absolutely prevalent. I mean, thankfully, fewer and fewer having to switch to double byte sets when entering my name in katakana when applying for a credit card on a very old Japanese banking system. So
Oh
yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah.
definitely a real struggle that we do have to face. It's kind of interesting because I'm seeing patterns of like the difference between innovation in the sense of the content itself versus the hardware or the medium that distributes the content. It seems
Mm,
like in the past when you called Japan a Galapagos, it was because the hardware itself was a bit different, and that's why they
mm,
were so unique. And you kind of also talked about this in the interactive TVs where it's not the
mm.
hardware that's different, but it's the content that it's the
Mm.
multimedia. Therefore, the innovation might not be as, breakthrough as let's say like playing mobile games on your phone. Is it also the case where in China the hardware is a bit different? I'm not very familiar, but is that the case or?
Yeah, I lived in China in after we sold Upstart Games because I sold it to a Chinese group,
Mm,
and then I visited China many times after that, and then raised some of the funding for Story Toys came from China. Every time I went to China, it was different, and every time I saw new weird stuff.
mm,
Um, and the first folding phones in China.
hmm
Apple announced their I don't know. It looks exactly like the same iPhone I've been using for the last 3 years. They announced a new iPhone yesterday. Um, I think it wasn't Huawei announced a trifold phone that literally folds out to a full-size tablet.
Yeah.
So we're seeing incredible hardware innovation happening in China. I just wish, the software innovation, like the, but it didn't have the same challenges that we see. You know, TikTok coming under scrutiny for, and
Mm,
and that in other markets. So there's definitely a high degree of hardware innovation changing consumer habits. I think COVID also had a profound, I haven't been back to China since COVID had a profound impact on China, but also the use of contactless technology,
mm,
which was like I ordered for my first ever QR menu, I think in China it might have been in Taiwan. No, it was in mainland China, I think in 2016 or something. This was what I was saying, like had taken the place at that point, this kind of use of technology in very, very different ways.
mm. 2016 is very early for QR menus.
Yeah, I mean, what the first QR codes we were seeing them in Japan in the early 2010s.
Yeah.
And it might not have been a true QR, but it was 2016 or 2017. Absolutely. 'Cause
Mm.
I think I have a photograph of it in my camera roll somewhere.
Yeah, I see. That's very, very interesting to hear kind of like how the Galapagos brand has kind of shifted over to China over the years. But thank you very much. The next question is, in a LinkedIn post, you mentioned that it's not the lack of access to capital that causes the lack of unicorns in Japan, but rather the lack of entrepreneurial spirit. Could you explain this idea a bit more?
Well, so actually, I think it's a lot more nuanced. I
Mm,
actually think that Japan has great entrepreneurial spirit and has had at many stages over its history. And I think somebody asked me recently, is as you know, I'm putting together a venture studio at the moment, and somebody asked me recently. Well, they actually stated to me, they didn't ask me. They said Japan doesn't have the entrepreneurial skills. And I said, well, actually. Japan has the talent, but it has an executional gap. Um, and because there's an executional gap in entrepreneurship, um, what we are seeing is people who might choose entrepreneurship but lack confidence because they don't know they're entrepreneurs, or they're not members of communities within which entrepreneurship is, or families being communities as well, a society in which entrepreneurship is acceptable. So we need to break that down. And also, many people can't afford to be entrepreneurs because we've had, stagnant situation when it comes to economic growth, and wages have been stagnant for years and years and years, and
mm,
people just don't have that much disposable income to be able to say, I'm going to take 3 months out or 6 months out to pursue my entrepreneurial journey. Now, there's a lot that the Japanese government could do, and there's many things that they are doing to try to resolve this. But I think that's the first piece, is the executional gap. So
mm,
fixing the funnel and making sure that people feel that they can get down there. So we need to get more people into the entrepreneurial environment. But It's not for lack of spirit. It's how do we actually fan that spirit or promote that spirit or provide people with a sense of security that really tell them that it's actually okay to fail a little bit.
Mm.
And that you failing a little bit isn't your idea failing somewhat isn't you failing as a person. So helping develop that. And I think I said also in the LinkedIn post, I think there is actually good access. And actually, let me just say, and I'm gonna do a little bit of shameless self-promotion here. Several of the most impressive young entrepreneurs that I've met globally ever, and I've met really, really great entrepreneurs, are Japanese. I've had the good fortune to invest in them. One would be Ryo Iwamoto of Tea Room, who has delivered a tea business with internet-like economics, and Manami Yamada of MyFit, who I've never come across. MyFit, it's a women's health startup, and I've never come across an entrepreneur with such amazing skills for working with data. So like I'm seeing great entrepreneurs. And there's great access to capital once people say, I'm going to jump. Like once they like the pre-seed is a problem and maybe the spark of an idea, but the seed capital market is great. The problem is that, in my view, Japan lacks the sort of Series B and Series C follow-on capital, or rather, not that it lacks it, that capital tends to come from corporate,
Mm.
um, which are less sensitive to whether a company should become a unicorn or make an IPO. And then the other thing is, and this is a double-edged sword, Japan has a small cap, one of the world's probably maybe the world's only successful small cap market
Mm.
where you can IPO with 10 million in revenue a year. I mean, you can do it in London, but there's no liquidity in the market. There is liquidity in the Japanese small cap markets. So, as I'm going to use your words again, you put it great. I mean, entrepreneurs, like they do the IPO, they get the house in Daikanyama and the G-Wagon, and that's it, right?
Yeah.
Was it a G-Wagon or was it Tesla? I think it was a G-Wagon.
Yeah,
Um,
it was a G-Wagon.
yeah, yeah. So, and that's kind of wrong, right? And I think that is the IPO market creates that. Now, however, I'm sure you've seen it over the last couple of weeks. Firstly, Revolut and then Stripe announcing, secondary placings and equity
Mm.
releases. And, in the case of Revolut, well, I think they felt that they could go much further before having to IPO. So let's create a small equity release for our team. They deserve it. Let people feel the sense that they can stick with us on this journey and that they
Mm.
can move forward and that there is a chance of a major payout, but give them enough money to get the house in Daikanyama and the G-Wagon, but not so much money that they can afford to shop in National Azabu. So
Mm.
like just give them enough to keep going and to keep them motivated and to keep them loyal to the company. I think that's a potential opportunity for Japan. But there's many, many sides to this problem. Like, and I think a lot of it again comes back to the lack of the Series B and Series C investors. Um, Something else that we see is I think when a Japanese investor then how do I phrase this? I find sometimes that valuations of early stage or Japanese companies or seed and Series A stage Japanese companies are misaligned with their overseas peers, right? And it can be a great sense of accomplishment because as a founder, you're holding a big chunk of common stock.
Mm.
When your company gets valued at the equivalent of of $10 million, but it can be a really sharp slap in the face when you start talking to overseas investors and you said that you did your seed round at $10 million, and you just can't get any traction because actually your valuation is way too high.
Mm.
And I think that valuation mismatch is also formed in part by the ready available of corporate venture capital, and also the ease of access to a domestic IPO market. So I know many CEOs who've gone overseas and said, okay, I'm going to do a round overseas and come back and said, actually, let's just stick to my original capital plan and I'm going to
Mm.
IPO in 5 years. So I would like to, and whenever I say to a Japanese entrepreneur, bring your valuation down, like it'll stand to you in the long term. They think
Mm.
like I'm just trying to get more money as an investor. I'm not. I'm saying genuinely, look, bring your valuation down and
Mm.
then we can start talking about overseas investments.
I see. Wow, that. was I had never heard of the equity release path, but I think that also makes sense in terms of like the mindset or like the expectations of maybe some entrepreneurs and people who work in these startups as well and what they're aspiring for.
But you'll often find it a Series B or a Series C for a company that's very, very high potential, that execs will often engage in secondary sales. So a
Mhm.
VC or a new investor will come in just to buy some stock to get in. Maybe the company's already profitable, but
Mm,
an investor will come in to be part of the journey, and it's a win-win for the investor. They're getting in at at a Series B valuation, and the founders can actually relieve their own financial pressure to an extent.
definitely, for sure. One final question before we jump into the lightning round of questions, but what is one thing Japan is particularly strong in when it comes to startup and venture?
I think now Japan has, I mentioned earlier on, an incredibly astute Generation Z who have self-raised themselves as international citizens because
Mm,
it's not from it's not from the benefit of guidance. And I think they have a desire to change the world, but change it on Japanese terms, not necessarily just go to Silicon Valley and try to be a Silicon Valley entrepreneur. Bring some of the great things about Japan, be it cultural, be it social, bring some of the
mm,
great things about Japan overseas and try to build their business. A new path for Japanese entrepreneurship, like anchored in Japan, but with a global business. And I am also seeing at the moment there are a number of very strong policy initiatives to support this. I guess I'm involved in two JETRO programs on this
mm.
one. Techstars Tokyo, of course. But the Food Frontiers program, which is a program that we're running with Kitchen Town and Jetro to bring 12, it's 12, a cohort of 12 growth stage Japanese food innovators into overseas markets. And these people are really, really good. I mean, these
Mm,
are like really thinking about expansion in the right way, don't lose their Japanese identity, but also acknowledge the fact that they do have to culturally adapt their products in some ways to the US market. They can't just go in with an unmodified product. So really, really interesting program to support them in that. So I think Japan has never had a better opportunity
mm,
to equalize and maybe outpace entrepreneurial activity on a global basis and really I hate the word punch above its weight. I think something that would really help that more. I mean, I'm Irish. I benefited from and get paid back to. I benefited from state direct investment of the Irish government in my startups
mm,
um, through a group called Enterprise Ireland here. I think if Japan could look at that direct investment model, it would really help because that's what actually bridges, that's what can give the confidence. Like how I'm doing it is by building a venture studio. So
mm,
I'm prepared to pay people to become entrepreneurs. But the programs that I benefited from as an Irish entrepreneur were kind of equivalent. The Irish government was saying to me, okay, if you have an idea, we will pay you money to take time out of your work to go and validate your idea. And that'll be non-dilutive through a feasibility grant. And
mm.
then if you can raise €10,000, we will give you €100,000 on a convertible note. So this, like, if you look at it by deal count, Ireland claims that Enterprise Ireland is Europe's most active venture capital group. I wouldn't like to look at the IRR,
Mm,
but certainly on a deal count basis. And I think if Japan could be a bit more progressive than that
mm.
and actually start to directly fund startups, that's the kind of fuel that is needed to be added to the sparks of entrepreneurship in Japan at the moment.
So you're thinking a model where it comes out of the government's pockets and then directly funds.
State operated VC.
I
You know,
see.
Techstars, of course, great state supported,
Mm,
but actually state operated VC it's Singapore copied the Irish model. The Irish started it. We're very proud of that and several other things. But that would really, really help the startup economy at the moment.
Mm-mm. I mean, given the current perspective and like mindset of the Japanese government, do you think it's probably likely in the coming years that it might happen, or is there something like a like some sort of obstacle that's kind of holding them back from doing that?
I don't think there is. Who knows? Maybe there's plans afoot. It's just an observation. I don't engage that deeply. At a state
Mm.
level, obviously, I'm Irish and my Japanese is about as skillful as I used to say 3 year old. I think I'm up to 4 years old now. So it's not a conversation that I can engage in that deeply, but I
Mm.
hope so. I'd be very, very happy to see it if it is.
Definitely, yeah, that's for sure.
The
All
programs that
right.
they are running are excellent. I mean, they're
Mm-mm.
like Techstars was such a welcome addition, and I've lost count of the number of new programs dealing with different sectors. So it is a great start.
Definitely. Okay, then we can go into the lightning round of questions. The first one is, if you were banished from Japan but could take one thing with you, what would it be?
A Konbini. I'm going to take an entire Lawson Famima. I take a seven. I'd even take a mini stop. One
Oh,
Konbini.
wow.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Give me a Konbini like within 100 meters. That's just like I have in Tokyo.
Yeah, they have everything there, honestly. You can take
Yeah,
Tokyo with you by taking a Lawson, I think, or a 7-Eleven.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you. The second question is, what is a book that you'd recommend?
And I recommend two, if it's okay.
Hmm.
The one that I really recommend is The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. Now, I recommend that grudgingly these days, ever since he and Mark Andreessen turned into MAGA-loving Trump supporters.
Hmm.
But it is a great book and a fantastic atlas for navigating the entrepreneurial journey, especially the hard things about hard things and this concept of the peacetime and wartime CEO really got me through some hard times in Story Toys. And then the other one, which also got me through some hard times, and I've recommended this to a lot of people, is Reboot by Jerry Colonna, who's a very famous leadership coach now, but was a very famous venture capitalist. And it was the one line that I always remember from that is just because you feel like shit doesn't mean you are shit.
Mm.
And That's a super, super important lesson for any entrepreneur.
Thank you so much. I'll definitely link them down below. The last question is, what do you do when you need a push of courage?
Well, I've never run or hit the gym or played any sports of any kind unless you count video games as sports. But so I read fiction mostly, modern literature, a lot of post-apocalyptic stuff, depending on where I'm at in my startup cycle.
Mm.
Um, but fundamentally, if I want to relax, like relaxing helps me unblock things and get things into place. I cook, but mostly if I can, I walk.
Mm.
And I can walk, 15, 20K steps a day. It puts me in a meditative state, and certainly I can start a walk with a lot of problems and finish a walk with a lot of solutions. Getting into
Mm.
that space is really, really important for me.
Definitely. I'm with you on that. It's definitely
Good.
very helpful. Thank you very so much again for sharing your story. And I'm really, really excited for what you'll help build in the ecosystem going forward. Just final quick two questions. But how do people reach out to you?
Well, you can reach me like LinkedIn is probably really good. I'm trying to encourage more Japanese people to use LinkedIn
Hmm.
to build profiles. Facebook sort of seemed to turn into the LinkedIn of Japan.
Hmm.
So LinkedIn is great, and I just DM me. I think my DMs are open on
Hmm.
LinkedIn.
Perfect. And the
Or,
second
or
question.
Barry.O'Neill at valuecreate.net is fine as well, but like that's no problem. Email or LinkedIn is best.
Sounds good. And the second question is, how can the audience be helpful to you?
Ooh, no, that's a curveball. Well, reach out, connect,
Mhm.
and I think you know, as I'm building this venture studio, I really want to hear from people who feel that they would like to be part of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, that feel they can bring something to the table, but mightn't necessarily feel able to self-finance that, or may have questions about their own confidence and ability or fears of failure. So I want to find potential entrepreneurs in residence for Grow Nova, the venture studio, and yeah, I mean, I think that would be if you could do that, absolutely fantastic. Please reach out or recommend people to reach out.
Mm, fantastic. Thank you very so much again. And that's it for today's podcast.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Take
Thank
care.
you.